was like, we really value American kind of dynamism and industry and bringing things back and providing more opportunities. Let's see if we actually prove it out. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's one thing to kind of say these things and hypothesize and through conjecture, but I think it's another thing to actually, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like when we bring these companies, back to the U.S. or buying U.S. goods, et cetera, and it's more expensive because we have a higher quality and standard of living here. Are people willing to assume those price increases? When the tariffs on, Temu goods that people are just getting all the time are really cheap, when those things, 2x in price, and you don't have the same purchasing power. Like, let's see how much we actually really care about those people who are in the factories, et cetera. And I think we should. I think everybody deserves to have more economic power. Will we, we also have to worry about.
3, 2, 1, go! Welcome back, Rush Hour Podcast. It's been a minute. Feels like a minute since our last podcast. I'm TW. This is Justin. We're two non-technical tech guys with tons of experience in the Silicon Valley and tech and business and broadly. But we're here to give you the latest. Let's talk tariffs. I mean, everyone is going wild about tariffs. The stock market tanked. It's Thursday as we're recording this Thursday morning. We're in the midst of a crazy stock market slide. But I thought you always do this great job of like breaking it down in layman's terms on what this is. Walk us through what are tariffs, how do they work, and we can get into like the impact on tech.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna take a pause for 1 second to just close my eyes and think about my stock portfolio right now, which is just so crazy.
Or pour a little out for mine.
Let's do a little prayer. But yeah, let's pour a little out. But yeah, happy to kind of jump in. So like, what are tariffs in layman's terms? Because even I feel like I'm a relatively learned guy, but I wasn't as familiar with tariffs and kind of history and things like that. So hopefully this overview will be somewhat helpful for folks who are kind of learning just like I was. So quick definition. What are tariffs? Tariffs are essentially taxes on imports. And so like, why is the current administration doing this? Like, why do people impose tariffs generally? Like, what are kind of three arguments for tariffs, just to kind of contextualize what we're talking about? One is that what tariffs are meant to do is protect domestic industries. So that's one piece. So by making it more expensive for people to buy foreign produced products, it allows local businesses, those in the U.S., to do better, to do more business because more people are buying domestically. The second, this is tied to the first point, is it encourages reshoring. So we've had so much manufacturing go outside of the U.S. Tariffs are meant to reshore critical supply chains, particularly those in sectors that we'll talk about within tech, like semiconductors, defense, but then all other kind of forms of manufacturing where we've seen large tariffs recently to bring these companies back to the United States. And the third, and Trump talks about this a lot, but to use it as acting as a type of leverage for international trade. So for trade negotiations, pushing back on what they believe to be unfair trade policies that have happened for a long time in terms of being in a trade deficit, which some people argue we've been in for a long time. Those are kind of three of the primary ways. That's why tariffs are being imposed. That's kind of like three reasons why, the government or this administration imposes tariffs. So what are the arguments against tariffs? So those are things like, okay, maybe benefit America, domestically, then what are the negatives? Well, one is it raises prices, particularly in the short term. So for consumers and businesses, tariffs can act like a hidden tax influence across the economy. So, when tariffs are imposed, the companies or the people producing the products have to assume the cost. And a lot of times it's the companies that are assuming the cost, and that results in raising prices for the consumer. The second thing is it disrupts global supply chains. There's so many supply chains that are built outside of the U.S. that have been built on free trade and models that have existed for a really long time outside of us. Not having, this type of tariff war that we've had since like the 1930s. And so a lot of industries are, rely on imported components because they don't exist here in the U.S. and we need to kind of bring those to the U.S. and that's not a short-term fix. And the last piece is around retaliatory tariffs. So when we do tariffs on other countries, a lot of times they respond on us, and that can not only harm exporters but also global economic stability that can lead to recessionary environment. kind of 3 pros, 4 tariffs, 3 against. Let's boil this down into kind of tech space and what that means. So, T Dub, I know you've kind of done some exploration and thinking around this, and you have some ideas around what, maybe why tariffs could be good
Yeah.
for the tech industry. So, I'd love to kind of dive into that and we can have a debate.
I was going to break it down a little further. Walk us through like some other country, let's just say China, makes goods, or let's just really simplify it, for $1. There are now
Mhm.
tariffs at, let's just say, 100% tariffs, going to double the cost. How does that work? Okay, that this said company manufactures in China, has a buyer in the U.S. who's buying it at wholesale. It was $1. Where does the tariff come into place?
Yeah, the tariff comes into place when that good reaches the U.S. It's an
Okay,
additional kind of tax on that good. So the supplier can either assume that, or they can try to or they'll raise prices so that they're still getting kind of net, their margin, keep their margins the same. But if the importer is not going to kind of reduce their prices, then they'll have to increase their prices, and then a lot of times that gets passed on to the consumer, and that's why you get a lot of pushback on tariffs.
right. So you hear of like, hey, we are going to tax China, which really the way you could tax China is if China says, oh, okay, you're going to double the cost to our supplier, then we're going to reduce our cost. But if they don't, it's really up to them. If they say,
Yep,
no, this is the cost, we have no margin. We're selling it to you at this. So it's just more expensive for you. So really it's a tax on the company here in the US that wants to buy that for wholesale. The cost just went up twice. So the thought is then it's more competitive. You're going to look internally to try to make something for cheaper. Is that
that's right.
generally
It's
the
to
thought here in terms
make
of,
the
okay,
the competitors who are
trying to buy
making similar
something now, it's
goods
more
in the market
expensive.
tier.
I'm going to make it instead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I think maybe I got to lag a bit. Yes, it's to make the competitors here more attractive for consumers within the U.S.
Yeah, so just so everyone understands, 'cause I think a lot of people thought, oh, it's just a tax on China. It's not. Like, it's not a tax on the other country. It is just an inflated price. So to make it more competitive, to give the advantage internally. So I was thinking about like in the 30s when this happened last, and we're in the Silicon Valley. If looking back historically at what happened, the roots of the Silicon Valley really started with something like a tariff. So Frederick Terman was a professor at Stanford, and he was really pushing his engineering students to like, hey, start a company in your garage. You should do something here. Don't go and work for another company and figure it out. He really pushed his students to start something. It's really the thing you should do. And two of his students were William Hewitt, David Packard, who in 1939 technically was the first company in the Silicon Valley. So they came under him and started this thing. They were like, all right, we're going to open it as a Palo Alto garage. And they started inventing and making computers, which is kind of incredible. So when you think, what good could happen from this? I think there's some, I don't want to say inventions, but there's going to have to be some creativity here where people say, hey, look, things are more expensive now. I'm gonna go into my garage and make something. If you look at how the Silicon Valley started, it was literally that. They Apple and the semiconductors, all the actual silicon components of chips started in garages back in the day. So that's why I think long term, yes, from 30s to 50s, 60s, 70s is really when the Silicon Valley's roots started growing, and it was started with this. The thing that's really different now is obviously the visas and coming. There was the brain drain then also, where we took people from other countries and brought them in to campuses and universities all over, and they called it the brain drain, to get scholarships and people here to help innovate here in the US. But we're not doing that. We're doing the opposite here. We're saying we're blocking the people coming in, and we're really trying to do it all here internally in the US. So it's obviously it's going to be different, but I think it will force some creativity. It forces us to say, all right, how do we make things? How do we make them cheaper? How do we do things in a way that is beneficial for my business? Because now there are these tariffs out there. It's easier said than done. But
Yep.
like I'm thinking long term, 20, 30 years down the road, maybe there's some other new company that comes out of this in the US. Google, Apple, HP, all of these big tech giants really were born out of this. Not to say it could happen again, but that is, I mean, what happened. So maybe fingers crossed something like that could happen. I definitely have my doubts. It's just like a perfect storm that needs to happen for it to go down. But we're feeling the pain of it now. Maybe you could talk about that, like why this is such a harmful thing for the market today.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the key piece of what you ran through was kind of like the 20, 30 years down the road and like a
Yeah.
bit of a fingers crossed that it will work. Um, with Silicon Valley, absolutely kind of constraints drive innovation. And I think that we saw that with like outside of US context with like DeepSeek, right? These people weren't able to get the same quality hardware. So what they did, they make their software even better relative to the hardware that they had, and were able to create models that were competitive with what we have here with ChatGPT. So I think the constraints can definitely drive innovation. That being said, if you think about physical products and you think about what needs to be created to kind of drive innovation, AI, et cetera, like you need raw resources and materials that we cannot get in the US right now. And then additionally, we also don't have so many companies here that can kind of manufacture. So, startups who are building physical products in particular, consumer electronic devices, IoT devices, et cetera, they're going to face much larger expenses for imported chips, batteries, materials, kind of everything else they need. They're squeezing already really tight margins. And where do you think that's going to get past? Well, one, I think it's going to slow down innovation. In the short term, we'll see kind of in the long term, but I feel like things are so dynamic now that you kind of have to focus more on the short term and kind of slow the rate of progress in the industry, which I don't think is great right now. And I think that okay, let's say that tariffs support like force suppliers to come back to the U.S. and they're building and they're doing manufacturing here and everything else. That's going to take time. It's not like we can just stand. I
Yes.
mean, maybe in some countries, like in Asia, they can stand up factories and stuff like that, like within a few months. And I don't know exactly how they're able to do that, but you kind of see all these kind of videos and and examples of that. Within the U.S., it's going to take several years to do that. And in that time, like, do we have the time for all that pain? And do we have the time relative to what we're trying to do on the innovation front to kind of like stave that off? I don't know. I don't feel super bullish on it, but it remains to be seen.
It's, to me, the scary part for me is like you're going to impose these, and I guess part of it is a threat, part of it is a try. You can say, oh, we're trying to innovate here, but how the U.S. works, 4-year terms, like it's hard to understand what you build a policy for 20 years, 30 years out, but you've only got 4 years. Like you could unwind this thing in 4 years, and then it just seems really scary. But I'm hoping it works. Like looking at my portfolio, I'm sure everybody's the same. It doesn't feel great. It just seems like there are a lot of question marks. There's a lot of risk. Understand it conceptually that it could help, but like all the moving parts make it really scary. And like China has built this infrastructure in India. Not, I shouldn't just say China. Taiwan, Mexico, all these that have manufacturing experience that they built over time that we're now just going to cut off seems really scary. Like so, and we're going to try to build it internally with what AI robots and manufacturing innovation. I guess I don't know, but maybe that's the
Yeah.
move. I don't know.
The crazy thing is, it was funny. I was actually talking to my mom earlier today at my folks visiting from the East Coast, and she was like, "Yeah, with these tariffs, right? It's supposed to bring jobs back to the U.S., but with AI and all of the robots we have, et cetera, maybe by that time that would happen, you just have the robots doing the jobs anyway. So it's like we brought back these jobs, but then these manufacturers are like, well, actually, it's less expensive for us to just get these robots that can work 24 hours. I don't know. I think that try to be as objective as possible. I think that there are benefits in trying to kind of like do more things as a country and to provide opportunities for people who felt disenfranchised to have better economic mobility. And I think we should be ideating on different things to that extent. But I think that isolating ourselves, maybe alienating, not having necessarily a clear plan, not having something that's like kind of broadly communicated to our partners internationally, et cetera, like it just kind of creates a dynamic where we become isolationist, here, and then also like our businesses don't have time to plan. I can understand. Yeah, I can understand bringing things back, but I also think we have to just understand like the bigger role that we play in the broader economy and how those things interact. And we'll see where things look like in a few quarters. But just the signaling is challenging. It's challenging to kind of like do any real planning right now of your business.
Yeah, it seems like a really difficult time to navigate. It's always difficult to do a startup, and now you're doing one under these conditions. It's pretty scary. I can't imagine if you're just starting a company that's like, a few months old and you're getting ready, and now there's all these tariffs and things you got to worry about. It's got to be a little nerve wracking to say the least. But like, I think a lot of the pushes, you'll figure it out. Like, you push forward, and it's also like what we've talked about. These giants have such an advantage already in the Amazon, the Apple, and distribution and marketing, and now you throw this on there where cost is another factor. It just seems like another sort of advantage that these massive conglomerates have over everyone else, that they have the dollars to absorb this, whereas startups and small companies are going to struggle to innovate, and they're going to need help, whether it's acquisition or others. It's going to be an interesting few months, to say the least. We'll keep an eye on it. Like the H-1B issue we talked about in the past. I know a lot of people are wondering, that still hasn't really been resolved. I know lots of universities and things are wondering about, can they bring students over? That's still up in the air. Companies that are trying to hire externally are also still not getting a ton of clarity. So it's definitely an interesting time, right? Something's got to give as we're making our way through this.
Yeah. And yeah, so we'll see. I think one of the benefits of, kind of situation we were in before relative to kind of like this pre-tariffs is there's a lot of like international collaboration, data flow, et cetera, that I think improves, particularly AI and technology layer. The partnerships that kind of existed between countries and all these different models and innovations that are happening. And that could kind of, that limiting of cross-border knowledge as well, which is like historically driven rapid AI progress, can limit it as well. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. This is kind of what the country wanted in some ways. They signaled the tariffs, and so yeah.
What I mean, when I look at where we are as a country in terms of like education and values and all of those things, it seems like a really scary time to do this, if I'm being honest. Because like, there is you hear of like working hours and working hard, and innovating are things that are tougher, as more kids want to be influencers and do not necessarily get their hands dirty making things. And like, as a culture, we sort of look down upon that as a career. Like, hey, you work at a factory? What is that? Like, that's not what I want to do. Like,
Yeah.
we need to fix that part of our culture if that's something we want to do. If we're going to come back and say, hey, something made in the USA, that there's pride in that, and you got to be good at that, and that's a cool thing. I think there's going to have to be some work around the thought process in our culture of what does success look like. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people in the back of their mind think, I'm better than working in the manufacturing business, because that's for another country, because we just haven't prioritized that.
Yeah.
Seems like there's something there.
I mean, if our values, if what we're trying to signal by all these changes, like we really value American kind of dynamism and industry and bringing things back and providing more opportunities, let's see if we actually prove it out. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's one thing to kind of say these things and hypothesize and through conjecture, but I think it's another thing to actually, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like when we bring these companies, back to the U.S., we're buying U.S. goods, et cetera, and it's more expensive because we have a higher quality and standard of living here. Are people willing to assume those price increases? When the tariffs on, Temu goods that people are just getting all the time are really cheap, when those things, 2x in price, and you don't have the same purchasing power. Like, let's see how much we actually really care about those people who are in the factories, et cetera. And I think we should. I think everybody deserves to have more economic power. Will we we also have to worry about our piggy banks as well, and how much are we willing to do there. And I think that's what's going to get proven out within this exercise.
And before we get to our next topic, software development, which feels like it's in the cloud, like it's cloud computing. You're making software, you're making things within your phones and computers and digitally. How do we feel about that now? Does that feel like there's going to be tariffs there as well, in terms of like computing power? And like, hey, if I'm a software engineer and I'm making something in the cloud, do tariffs impact me? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's kind of yet to be seen, but you make a really good point, which is if you are if you are trying to engage in this period as someone who's being proactive and not being reactive and not being like um, and not being kind of like and not letting kind of the world, uh, just put all these kind of pressures on you without doing something. I think there's probably no better time to actually really lean in to using software as a way to build products and services to help people that will not be as impacted by that stuff. I mean, we'll see what it looks like over time. But with the tools that are available now, it's kind of no better time to be an entrepreneur and really lean more into that the skill set, because at the end of the day, all of these pressures, everything that's happening is just going to just put more pressure on the economy. Or there's pressure on the economy, people lose jobs and people don't have as much agency. And the way for you to kind of reclaim some of that is by owning a piece of the pie yourself and figuring out how you can create differentiated value for the marketplace and using the existing tools and the power that we've never had before. It's kind of like makers that knowledge is now a commodity.
Right.
Like you can go anywhere and you can use ChatGPT, et cetera, and you can have knowledge. Well, how do you leverage that knowledge to create arbitrage based on your individual expertise and how you apply it? And I think it's, more people got to kind of lean into that space, because the Shopify entrepreneurs and, everything else is in that space, it's going to become a lot more difficult to kind of make profit.
Yeah. Trying times, but interesting. We'll keep tabs on this. This is going to be a thing that we probably have to check in on every week or two in terms of, hey, what are the and like you said in the beginning, this all could be a big bluff and a use for negotiation
Mm-hmm.
in trade wars. So we don't
Yep.
know yet. Like this is obviously a very tricky topic, and one right on topic. What about TikTok and where they are? What are you hearing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so just to kind of catch everyone up there who may not be following as intently as TW and I, because it kind of affects a lot of the things of businesses and what we find interesting. But in March, just to kind of go back, in March of 2024, House passed a bill giving ByteDance 6 months to divest TikTok US, and the deadline ends this Saturday unless Trump extends it. So there's pressure from kind of the Dem and Republican side, figure out a deal. There's like some ongoing Senate debates going on, and so what I thought could be interesting for this segment is, hey, do we think it will be acquired? And then two, who do we think is the most likely acquirer? Maybe I can start at that. I'd love to see, who you think. Maybe we
Hear your
agree
thoughts on
or
that.
not. So to the point of, do I think TikTok will ultimately be acquired? I think the answer is yes. I don't think there's any way that TikTok is going to shut down within the US. I think there is just too much there's too much, like, the platform itself is so ingrained into American culture and like product usage now that just entirely strip that away would be very detrimental to any party that's in power. And so I don't think the Republicans can kind of allow that to happen. So whether it gets extended, whether we get another extension deadline or not, I think a deal will ultimately happen. So if there is an acquirer, the drum roll is that I think there will be Oracle, and I have a few reasons behind that. So one is the infrastructure is already in place for Oracle. So Oracle already hosts TikTok US user data on its cloud and has for some time. I think Oracle is even somewhat of like a shareholder in ByteDance. Like based on this relationship, they've kind of have had their tentacles in TikTok for some time now. The second piece, and this is something that bipartisan, in terms of a bipartisan way, people really cared about, is the security credibility. Oracle is very much trusted by some of the kind of top security agencies within the U.S. Institutions who have really strict data needs, like the CIA, have had relationships really long time. So we talk about kind of data security; they had that covered as well. Then there's the political relationship, which you got to talk about within this context. Larry Ellison has been ingratiating himself with Trump over a long period of time: golf outings, fundraisers, the money toward the campaign, everything, kind of all the stuff that tech billionaires do with Trump, and maybe even a little more. So that relationship has been longstanding, and I think that's helpful. And then the last piece is, well, I think Oracle, relative to other tech companies in the U.S. that play in the social space, like Meta and Google, it's a lower threat to them as competitors. So in terms of like great U.S. companies that kind of lead the charge, within kind of social entertainment space, digital entertainment space, Oracle would acquire them. That it would kind of just keep the playing field level, as opposed to like a Google acquisition or Meta or Amazon, who actually, as of today, threw their hat in as a last minute bid. My chips are on Oracle. We'll see how it all plays out. Could be right, could be wrong, but maybe your reaction to that, and then who or if you think a deal will happen, or what do you think?
No, that makes, I mean, now that you say that, it makes sense. Because when I think of Oracle, I don't think of social and entertainment for them to use that as a jumping off point. It makes a lot of sense. My initial gut reaction to the whole thing was like, Elon seems to be the one that would be the most obvious choice, and the second would be Meta and their relationship in the past. So we'll see. I don't know. I always thought it would be a quiet third party that has a really good relationship and comes out of nowhere and does the deal. That's always kind of what I thought would happen. Like, the Chinese investment group would have enough connections in the U.S. to raise enough funds to then buy it and get it approved by a new company, which technically they would still own. That would be what I think would happen, but we'll see. My guess is it'll get delayed again, but I don't really.
If he hasn't signaled anything, probably getting delayed because there would have to be some news on Friday. Although Trump likes to have spectacle tied
Yes.
to everything, so we'll see. There could be some kind of late night news or early night morning news tomorrow, or at the 12th, at the final hour. But one other thing I wanted to say on this speech, which I thought was kind of interesting, based off of some news I was reading, is in the process of doing this deal, one of the ideas that had been floated, and I think it may have been by Oracle, I'm not exactly sure, was leasing the TikTok algorithm instead of purchasing it. And the reason for that being, ByteDance being somewhat reticent as they have to kind of comply with Chinese government and laws of just giving over algorithm, like the secret sauce. Not necessarily comfortable with that, but if the company who's acquiring them could kind of acquire everything but lease the algorithm, that's kind of an interesting hybrid model where it could potentially work in a way where the Chinese government and U.S. government can kind of come to terms there. But I just thought that was kind of like a novel approach.
Yeah, it seems like there could be a workaround in there somewhere with how this all goes down, but it seems like something's going to happen this week. It has to, right? Like, you still, as a new phone, you can't download TikTok, right? Like, it's still
I think you can now.
Oh, you can now. Okay.
I think you can. I think they assume. I think that the risk that the Play and Apple Store were going to assume by doing that, like the Trump administration basically just assuage the concerns of the platforms. I'm pretty sure you can download it. You can download it now, or at least because I know there was a whole big story around being able to download it again. You can download it now, but we'll see if it gets stripped from the stores again for a few hours, and then what that leads to.
Yeah, Matt, I think my daughter said CapCut was also a part of that, and they got killed too. Yep. And then a lot of people use as a video editor. So lots of interesting news. Big week ahead.
Big week.
Yeah, appreciate you jumping on. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Anything else? No, just a lot of crazy news. If you're enjoying the content or want to give us any feedback, just make sure to like, subscribe, add some comments. We're always kind of jumping in there and reading them. We'd love to respond back. We also appreciate all of the DMs and thoughtful notes on how this has been going. This experiment that's turned into our 39th episode today. So we're going to keep the momentum going, and appreciate all of you joining with us.
Appreciate your time. We'll talk soon.